Good morning, explorers, and welcome back to another episode of More to Explore. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. We got MW and Buddy's mom say good morning. Jack, what's up? We have quite a lot to talk about this week. So, first, we'll take a look at some of the top moments of the past couple weeks, and then we'll hear all about the Great Backyard Bird Count coming up starting this Friday, February 14th through the 17th. So, my name is Brian Bird, and joining me today, as always, is Explore.org's resident naturalist, Mike Fitz. And Mike, I'd say it's been a pretty dramatic couple weeks.
It's been busy for sure on the camp. There's, as usual, too much to keep up with. But we're happy to have you all here today, and we're going to show you some amazing scenes from the cameras over the last couple of weeks or so. And if you're new to Explore.org, welcome to the community, and welcome back to all of our longtime viewers. We're the world's largest live nature cam network with about 190 live cameras all over the world. If you have comments and questions for us, please drop those in the chats. We'll be looking for them during the broadcast today. We also want to know what cams you've been watching or are looking forward to watching this week. So that's something you can tell us as well. Right now, we're looking at the above water camera at Blue Springs State Park in Florida, brought to you by our partnership with Save the Manatee Club. And this was a camera that had some drama last week. We'll talk about what happened there in just a minute. But we'll also revisit a python saga at Tembe Elephant Park in South Africa. We'll visit some owls that are good at shrugging off winter's chill. We'll take a look at the new resident male eagle at the West End nest on Catalina Island and check out the first egg of the year on explore.org. Of course, we have that interview with Dr. Ben Haywood of the National Audubon Society for the upcoming backyard bird count. Brian, that's a lot of stuff to cover. So I guess we should just jump into it.
Yeah, definitely. Let's start with the manatee rescues.
Yeah, two manatees were rescued at Blue Springs State Park in Florida last week, and the above water cam was able to capture footage of both. So here we're looking at the final effort by rescuers to secure an orphan calf manatee. Natalie, who works for Save the Manatee Club, reported to cam viewers in the comments on Explode.org that this small manatee did not seem to be getting enough milk. Although manatee moms will sometimes adopt orphan calves, this calf didn't seem to form any strong bonds with the mothers in the area. Rescuers were able to capture the manatee calf and transport the calf to a captive facility where it'll be cared for and fed until it is large enough to survive in the wild on its own. And of course, we wish this calf the best of luck, and we thank everyone who worked to ensure its survival. And of course, thanks to Cora Burcham from Save the Manatee Club for alerting me to this event. Cora will be joining me for a live chat on February 19 when we will discuss this and the other rescue in detail, as well as a few of the other major manatee events and storylines that have happened this winter. So the survival of manatees as a species is very much in the hands of humanity, and we have more work to do to ensure that their species is secure. But yeah, that's one of the things that Cora and I will be talking about coming up in maybe about 10 days or so. Across the Atlantic, Brian, we were seeing a lot of drama over there as well. In South Africa, we saw a life and death struggle between a python and an impala, which did not turn out well for either.
No, no. This is probably one of the most wild moments I've seen on the live cam since I've been with the Explorer. And, just most impressive how it got out of this situation.
Yeah, this was amazing to see. It was a saga for the snake. We'll watch the video of the python tackling and subduing the impala, and the python was not able to finish its meal though, and we'll see why. So right in the center of the image right now, the python is taking down the impala. So impalas are antelopes that are found from Kenya south to almost Cape Town, South Africa. The impala's predator in this instance is a South African python. The hosts on the Wild Moments show last Thursday, Kelly and Ben, were talking about this too, and they agreed that the python tackled a young male impala, probably a yearling, yet for the snake. This impala might weigh about 100 pounds or so. And a special characteristic of pythons is their strength. Snakes in themselves, Brian, they always seem to be pretty strong. If you've ever handled a snake, hopefully like a non-venomous one, of course, don't ever touch a venomous snake or harass them. But even small snakes, sometimes if they wrap around your finger or something like that, they you can tell that they're strong animals. And pythons can subdue and eat uh, large animals, all without hands, feet, or any limbs at all. And for a long time, people assumed that constrictors, such as pythons, kill by suffocating their prey. But a study in 2015 found that pythons seem to be able to squeeze with so much strength and force that the victim's cardiovascular system can't compensate. The
Oh my
internal
gosh.
pressures imparted by the snake on its victim are much higher than the victim's normal blood pressure. So its circulatory system stops functioning because of the force applied by the snake. The heart can't pump blood anymore. So, in addition to difficulty breathing and possibly even spinal injuries and bone fractures from the strength of the snake, circulatory failure is one of the ways that pythons use their strength to overwhelm their prey. A python is like a giant rope of muscle with amazing strength. But the impala's anatomy later taught the python a lesson. And Brian, let's take a look at what happened about 4 hours later as the snake is still trying to eat the impala
Yeah, you can
because it was
tell.
eating. Go
Oh,
ahead.
no, yeah, you can tell it's, definitely the next day, and you can see even just the crazy gape of its mouth trying to eat the rest of it. But then you see the two antlers in the middle of the screen here actually pierce through its skin as it's trying to swallow it.
Right. Yeah. The python, again, they eat their prey head first. So that's the usual way that snakes eat their prey. The python's jaw uh, can hinge and open up widely. The skin is flexible and it stretches considerably. So it can consume things that are much bigger in diameter than its body. But this python ran into a problem because after it swallowed the impala's head, the impala's horns pierced the python's skin. And the discomfort and pain this python must have felt was it had to have been unbearable.
Oh
It
yeah.
realized that it was unable to continue eating, and it had to regurgitate the impala's neck and head. And you can even see it at certain points, like right at that the contours of the impala's head against the snake's skin. The snake was able to free itself, but not without injury, obviously. And rangers from Tenbei Elephant Park found it nearby and reported that it had a severe injury near its cloaca, too, which isn't located anywhere near the head of the python. So I wonder if that area of the snake was injured before it tackled the impala, or maybe during the struggle to subdue the impala. I don't know, but no matter the reason for the additional cloaca injury, Tenbei staff decided to rescue the snake and take it to a rehab clinic where it can recover from its injuries. And thanks to the staff at Tenbei Elephant Park for their work, and the staff at Africam for partnering with us to bring you this footage. I mean, this showed so much in just a few moments: life, death, pain, hunger, struggle, strength. It was all on display in this instance. And our webcams in Africa offer year-round opportunities to observe wildlife, but many of our bird-focused cams are seasonal in nature, Brian. So let's go back to North America because I think for the rest of the program, we're going to be talking a lot about birds because we got owls, eagles, and a lot of other things to discuss.
Definitely coming back to Montana. Definitely one of my favorite cams to watch during this kind of the winter wonderland scene. We have the long-eared owls.
Yeah, long-eared owls, they inhabit open and sparsely forested areas at mid-latitudes of the northern hemisphere. Some populations are migratory, although in Montana, where our long-eared owl cams are located, they're found year-round. A distinct characteristic of this species is their preference to roost in groups in winter. According to our webcam partner, the Owl Research Institute, long-eared owls prefer to live in areas with dense vegetation and shrubs next to open grasslands or shrublands where they can hunt. So they have good nesting sites in these very dense thickets, and then they have open hunting grounds nearby. Communal roosts of long-eared owls sometimes contain dozens of individual owls. And perhaps, expressing tolerance in this way is a product of limited roosting habitat, or perhaps long-eared owls experience safety in numbers, or perhaps there's another factor that I haven't considered. Communal roosting may also give them a chance to get to know each other and form pair bonds as the nesting season for them begins very soon. Long-eared owls often lay their first clutch of eggs between mid-March and mid-May, with the earliest eggs arriving in February in some cases. So this is definitely prime time to watch the roosting colony of long-eared owls in Montana. And I think people have been watching those cameras, as well as, let's see, I know Jen writes in on YouTube and said, I have been watching Sauces, the West End, and Two Harbors Eagle cams. Well, and yeah, those have been good cams to watch lately, Brian, because in the Channel Islands area of North America, there's been a lot of activity going on there.
Yeah, definitely. And it's speaking of a dramatic few weeks, like talk about the west end of the Catalina nest where it looks like we have a new male in the nest.
Yeah, the last few years have been a time of relative stability at the West End Eagle territory on Catalina Island, with the female thunder and the male eagle Akachita. Sorry, I'm sure I screwed up the pronouncement of that name. I even looked it up this morning to make sure I knew how. But anyway, they've been raising broods of eaglets there, and we didn't have reason really to suspect that things would be different this year until a different male eagle challenged Akachita for the territory. Although we don't, or although we couldn't really see much of the territorial battles between the birds, we saw that that Akacheta was bloodied afterwards, and that he wasn't able to drive away the other male. So the cams at the West End nest went offline due to technical issues around this time too, which was incredibly unfortunate because we were really unable to see a lot of what was happening for several days. And when the cams came back online, Akacheta was missing was missing from the scene, and the new male remained. And I asked Dr. Peter Sharp, a biologist who worked to help restore the bald eagle population in the Channel Islands. I asked him, how likely is it that thunder would accept the new male? And he said the probability of it is quite high. Eagles are probably more attached to their territory than their past or present reproductive partner. Now we're seeing the old resident male here, footage of him looking the worse for wear. And since that time, it's been thunder and the new guy. So who is the new resident big man on campus? Well, careful work by our camera operators allowed moderators and webcam viewers to read the characters inscribed on the male's leg bands. And the ring on his right leg reads 58/D, which identifies him as a bird nicknamed Macayo, who hatched in spring 2021 in a nest on San Clemente Island, California. And that's not far south of Catalina Island. So Macayo is a local bird looking to establish and ensure his reproductive success. And I do want to thank our camera operator who was working during this moment to give us that footage of the leg band. Just really great work by our camera operators. So even though, we witnessed the displacement of Akachita, and the event represents a real loss for him. So we don't want to gloss over that fact. But the establishment of Macayo on this territory might be symbolic of the success of the local bald eagle population. Perhaps bald eagles are reproducing well enough, and they are numerous enough that good territories are in demand in the Channel Islands region, and they're worth fighting for on the islands once again. I'm not sure we could have concluded that 20 to 30 years ago when intensive restoration efforts were needed to sustain bald eagle populations in the Channel Islands. So good luck to the West End Eagles. Let's stay in this area of the world, Brian, because the work of another Channel Islands pair means the return of our recurring segment, Egg Watch.
All right. First egg watch of the year. And we have our bald eagles in Sauces nests on Santa Cruz Island in California, just north of Catalina Island, just a little bit. And Mike, it seems like Audacity has laid 3 eggs so far, and only the first one is still there.
Yeah, that's kind of like their MO, unfortunately, over the last several years. So Jack and Audacity are the pair of eagles on this nest. Audacity is the female. She laid her first egg on February 2nd. And yeah, as you said, Brian, they have had two more eggs since then, but both of those broke soon after they were laid. They really didn't survive more than a matter of hours, I think, as far as I know. We don't know why, but the eggs of the Sauces pair have proven to be more fragile than typical, and none of their eggs have survived incubation, I think, since 2021. But they've persevered through that hardship, and I think we can admire their commitment and effort in the face of loss. Now, the first egg that was laid this year, today, I think it's something around 8 days old. So the first egg seems intact. If it's viable, and if no more eggs are laid at the Sauce's nest, and this egg survives incubation, then we might see an eaglet here in early to mid-March, because I think incubation lasts about 35 to 40 days for bald eagles. And again, thanks to our partner, the Institute for Wildlife Studies, for helping to bring us footage of the bald eagles in the Channel Islands region of California.
Yeah, we're definitely rooting for Audacity. I believe last year she laid 8 eggs and none of them were viable. So we're rooting for definitely egg number one. But Explore.org's webcams bring birds into many remote locations to you, but we shouldn't forget the amazing birds that live nearly everywhere, including in your own home neighborhood.
That's right. Yeah. As we mentioned at the top of the broadcast, between February 14 and 17, you can connect with your avian neighbors and contribute to their conservation through the National Audubon Society's Great Backyard Bird Count. To invite you to participate and to help us learn more about what we can learn from the bird count, I spoke with Dr. Ben Haywood, who is a director of community science for the National Audubon Society. And here's our conversation. Ben, it's great to speak with you. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to tell us more about the bird count.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Mike.
So I guess I'll just start with a real basic question. What is the Great Backyard Bird Count?
Yeah, so the Great Backyard Bird Count, which you might hear me call the GBBC for short because it is a mouthful,
Right.
is a 4-day event in February. It takes place every year where people from around the world observe and report the birds that they're seeing in their backyards or their parks or their neighborhoods. This year, as you said, it's happening February 14th through the 17th. We're coming up on about 30 years. We started in 1998. This is a collaborative project through the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, the National Audubon Society, and Birds Canada. And the cool thing about the count is that you can participate wherever you are. So you can record the birds outside your window. You could record them while you're walking to a neighbor's house. You could go to a local park, or even if you're in a really busy city, you can record the birds that you're seeing. Last year we had a banner year, so we recorded almost 8,000 species. That's about 70% of the known species, right, that exist. 210 countries, subregions that participated, about 650,000 participants in the count globally, and almost 400 events where people came together and participated in the experience. So a lot of cool stuff happening around the count.
And let's talk about how people can participate. I imagine there's many different ways to do it. If you're a hardcore birder, you might want to, count every bird that you could possibly see. But it's actually, if you're a beginning birder, it's much simpler than that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Really, you just need to determine where you want to watch birds, and if you want to do that on your own or in a group. So we do provide a community birding map on the GBBC website, which is birdcount.org, where you can find events in your local area. So you could, connect with people to participate in a count. There's also a map on that website for accessible birding spots through our partner at Birdability. And you don't really need to register. You just need to participate, right? And you don't even have to have a backyard, so to speak. You could go to a local park or, again, be in a city. As long as you see birds, you can participate. We do ask that you spend about 15 minutes at a minimum watching the birds that are around you. And you can do that at any point over the 4 days. You could do that more than 15 minutes. You could do a count every day if you want to. You could do it in different places. You don't have to stay in the same place. And the key is to try to identify as many of the birds that you're seeing and hearing in one place. If you are new, as you mentioned, to kind of the birding world, there are a number of great apps out there, and one in particular is the Merlin Bird ID app that integrates with the GBBC database. So it'll help you identify birds, and then you can submit directly through the app into the database. Really, really easy way to get started. But if you're a little bit more comfortable with ID, you can also use the eBird mobile app. Download that on your phone, submit the birds that you're seeing, or submit your checklist through the eBird checklist. And we do have step-by-step directions for each of these processes, again, on our website in the participant tab.
And you mentioned earlier that you have about 30 years of data for the Great Backyard Bird Count. So how does participating in the event help advance the study and conservation of birds? I'm wondering, how are you using this data? Because it seems like an overwhelming amount of information that's submitted.
Yeah, great question. There is a lot of information coming in. So I can give you a big overview and then maybe provide a couple of specific examples. I mean, as you know, bird populations are constantly changing, and that's especially the case now given all the threats that birds face. Data collected over these 4 days, however, give us a really rich snapshot of global populations. So for migratory birds in particular, we're talking about a snapshot of their well-being right before one of their big annual migrations. In the Northern Hemisphere, we call this the spring migration, right? And so when we do that, when we take a closer look at kind of what types of bird species exist where, whether that's urban environments or more natural spaces, conservationists get a really clearer picture of what birds need to survive, what kinds of habitat requirements they need, and how they may be changing or moving over time so that we can better support their well-being. The data as a whole goes into the eBird database, which is this massive repository of science data collected by participants all over the world. And in 2000 alone, there were over 200 articles that were published using eBird data. So this data is actively part of scientific research all the time. Just in the past several years, some of the things that are really coming out of this data, we're seeing range changes for a number of our species, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, probably in many cases due to milder winters associated with climate change. For migratory species that breed in North America, we're getting a much better sense of where they spend their non-breeding season. So where are the hot spots? What are the threats in those spaces for those birds? We also, a lot of the findings are continuing to point to species declines, and especially among birds that are seen in at-risk habitats like grasslands or the Arctic tundra. And then the other cool thing that we can see from this data is really acute impacts in the local environment. So, if there's a fire or flood or hurricane in a local area, or if we can track eruptions from year to year because of resource constraints, we can see that in the GBBC data because it's such a large database that happens year to year at the same time.
It seems like an extraordinary snapshot, in time. And then you combine that over years and decades, and then you get this wide breadth of information that's going to be very valuable going into the future. And I think when I started birding, I guess I was in college when I first started paying attention to birds. And I don't want to date myself, but it was a couple decades ago at least, and it was a little intimidating for me. Like I didn't really have a good set of binoculars. I had I think a very basic field guide. It maybe didn't even cover all of the birds that I could potentially see. So it was difficult at first. So I'm wondering if someone is new to birding, what are one or two of your best tips to have a good experience?
Yeah, I love that question. I think the first is just to start where you are. So really try to get familiar with your local area. I say that for a couple reasons. I'm a really big advocate for connecting with your local environment because you get to know your neighbors, both the human form and the wild form, right? And get a sense of what's typically there. What are you seeing on a regular basis? What time of the day are they showing up? And just to get that familiarity, it can build your confidence. And it also can help you start to see when unusual things show up or when things show up at different times of the year. You only really get that pattern recognition if you start where you are on a regular basis. So I would say just get to know your local environment. The second is, and I'll date myself a little bit here too, but when I first started birding, I pulled out my huge field guide, right? And you had to get these big sets of binoculars. There are so many amazing apps these days. The Audubon app is a good example. The Merlin Bird ID app that I mentioned earlier is another one that make this process so much easier. So I recommend folks download one of those, have access to one of those if possible. They can give you great photos and images and recordings of the songs that you might hear. And they make that experience a lot more approachable and fun. But the last thing I would say is give yourself a little bit of grace, right? You're not going to be an expert right off the bat, and that's okay. When you first spot a bird that you don't recognize, just try to observe it. Take some notes, maybe sketch some things out if you're, an artist or a drawer. There are really four things that we try to look at when we're identifying birds: the size and the shape of the bird, color and its color patterns, where it is it in a tree, on the ground, in the sky, and then its behavior. So, is it flying and soaring above? Is it hopping from tree to tree? If you can just start to recognize those things, you are well on your way to bird ID.
Absolutely. Yeah. And certainly don't ignore those birds that you might think are common and ordinary. I mean, because like a robin, a cardinal, a house sparrow, they have amazing stories to tell as long as we're willing to pay attention. So that's what I kind of enjoy anymore is like the chickadees. I put out a handful of peanuts every morning for a few chickadees. They come every morning and I get to watch them maybe kind of individually. It's kind of a fun experience.
Chickadees are beautiful birds, and we don't give them enough credit because they're kind of common in a lot of areas. Yeah.
Yeah, the world would be a sad place without chickadees, in my opinion. One
Agreed.
final question for you, Ben. I'm wondering what draws you to birds and working to learn more about them.
Hmm. So, I mean, the first thing is birds are everywhere, which is the wonderful thing about birds. They're so accessible. They bring people together. There's so many different varieties of them. So, no matter where you are in the world, what you're doing, there's something you can learn about birds, and that's exciting to me. But there's also something I think about birds that, really lifts the spirits. At least this has been the case for me. I mean, some of my first friends were ducks at a pond at my childhood pond when I was growing up. And there's some really cool research that's actually starting to tell us more about this. And in fact, there are literally mechanisms in the brain, calming mechanisms in the brain that are triggered when we hear birdsong, which I think is amazing. But beyond kind of that personal connection to birds, there's a connection to something that's much bigger, and that is we know the health of bird populations reflects the health of our planet. So what's good for birds is good for the earth, it's good for us. And that's one of the things that actually attracted me to the Audubon Society because in our flight plan, which is our current strategic plan, we're really focused on what we call bending the bird curve. And that is, we're working to halt and in some ways reverse the declines of birds that we've seen across the Americas in the past several decades. And I can't imagine a world without birdsong. I can't imagine a world where we don't have that pop of color from the cardinal that comes out in the winter and just brightens your day. And because science tells us that birds are in trouble, I think, we have a responsibility to ensure that birds can thrive into the future. So there's a larger purpose here for me when we observe birds, when we connect and observe and celebrate them, we're contributing to that larger purpose as well.
Very well said, and I think that's a great point to end our conversation on. And Ben, I want to thank you once again for taking the time to join us today, and have fun during the bird count.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Ben, it's great to speak with you. Thanks for taking the Oh, sorry. I think I was muted when we jumped back in there. But thanks again to Dr. Ben Haywood for joining us from the National Audubon Society. And again, the Great Backyard Bird Count this year is February 14 through 17. Go to birdcount.org to learn more. And thanks to everybody who's been in the chats today, talking about what we've been discussing, and some of the cams that you've been watching. I know April Owl wrote in on Exploded.org and said I've been watching gray seals, manatees, Africams, kitten rescue cams. And then, oh shoot, there it is. Yeah, Carrie wrote in on YouTube and said, I've been watching the sea lions on the orca cams, gray seals, and following the sauce's nest. So yeah, there's a ton to see. Every day I sit down if I have to work and I'm like, hey, which camera should I turn on right now? Sometimes it could be a tough choice, Brian.
It can be. And I have the same dilemma every day. But yeah, thank you all for sharing the cams that you're watching. And if you want something even more to watch, we have more events coming up, like our usual Africam show tomorrow, Tuesday at 6 a.m. Pacific. And then on Thursdays, we have the Wild Moment show, seeing all the best clips from the Africam cams, Thursday at 6 a.m. Pacific. And then, as Mike mentioned before, we have the Manatee Live Chat next Wednesday, February 19th at 4 p.m. Pacific and 7 p.m. Eastern. And again, if you have any feedback for the More to Explore show, if you have segments that you like, you have ideas, or just want to share a cool clip that you'd like us to dive in a little further, you can use the More to Explore feedback Google form, or you can always reach out to us with feedback@explore.org. And that is our show today. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, I want to give a special thank you to our moderators, our camera operators, and of course, Mike Fitz. And join us again February 24th for an episode of More to Explore. And until then, happy exploring.